What's going on, everybody? It's EricRayweather back here, and we just got some more Madden 21 gameplay news. EA just finished their live stream and dropped the news on their website, so I'm going to go over everything you need to know in this video. Some new gameplay stuff, some adjustments that were made from the beta, also some things like the film study ability that was controversial is actually going to be making a comeback, so make sure you stick around. A lot of info in this video. If you're new, however, and you don't want to miss out on any of the Madden 21 info, Friday, we're getting some more gameplay info from EA, and we're going to be getting actual gameplay footage really soon. Make sure you subscribe, bell icon on, so you don't miss any of those important uploads. We just hit 284K. You guys have been showing a lot of love lately. Let's get to 300K before Madden 21 drops. Now, let's get into the info. So, first, we're going to go over some additional gameplay features they touched on. So, with the new running ball carrier skill stick system they implemented this year, they've taken away the precision modifiers on the left trigger and L2 button. You would use these to do different types of jukes and spins. Now it says the precision modifier is no longer necessary once they implemented the skill stick for the ball carriers. All evasive ball carrier moves can now be naturally steered with the left stick input, with the amount of steering scaled per each ball carrier's special move rating. So now, we're going to get into that a little bit later about the archetypes for the ball carriers. That's going to kind of determine some of the modifiers and how you steer with the left stick. So you no longer have to use that left trigger to get better jukes or better spins. And instead now the left trigger is just going to be this button to celebrate. So make sure you know that when the game's out, because usually to celebrate you would hold both triggers and you would hold the A or X button depending on your system. Now the celebration button is just the left trigger, so anytime you hold that left trigger, your guys are going to start celebrating. So that's going to be a little bit of a difference that you have to get used to. Another gameplay feature here is called the DB lock-on mechanic. It says here, the new lock-on mechanic allows you to lock your user-controlled player into man coverage behavior on a specific receiver when holding down the LB/L1 button. While locked on, you can steer your player relative to the leverage on the locked on receiver rather than the whole field. So this allows you to have more control over the movement of your defender. When in the lock-on state, you do have to react to wide receiver cut moves within a timing window based on the player coverage ratings to stay with receivers making direction changes in route running. So this is a new mechanic where you can lock on to the cornerback, and this, I guess, is a way to try to shadow a good receiver. If someone's got a Julio Jones and you want to manually take him away yourself, if you get good with this mechanic, you can cut off his routes, the way he's trying to change direction, if you're really good at this mechanic. So this has been changed to the LB/L1 button. So because of this, they've also had other changes done to the control. So now when you want to do certain types of adjustments, like pull up QB contains or things like that, you're going to have to actually use the RB/R1 button to pull that up, whereas last year you would use the LB/L1 button. So some of the little controller changes there based on that, but the DB lock-on mechanic definitely sounds interesting. We'll see how it plays out. The next gameplay feature is the ball carrier archetype run styles. It says, an additional feature of depth coming to Madden 21 via the skill stick system is the concept of ball carrier archetypes that directly impact the run cycle and special moves each player will use. And here's the breakdown. You have agile, agile small, agile tall, and then you have bruiser, bruiser quick, and bruiser heavy. So an agile ball carrier can turn and change direction faster and smoother and has the quickest special moves applied to the skill position with players that have 80 agility or above and are under 225 pounds. An example of this is Christian McCaffrey. So this is going to be kind of, your agile players that are kind of just your average agile player, meaning by weight and by agility rating. These guys are going to have faster changes of direction. They're going to be smoother. That's why you don't need the precision modifier to do faster jukes and spins, because now it's going to be by body type, right? A guy like Christian McCaffrey is going to juke and spin much faster than a guy like CJ Anderson, for example, because they're just completely different styles of runner, completely different body types. Then you have the agile small, which is similar to agile, but with a shorter, quicker stride and length. And this applies to agile skill position players who are 5 feet and below. An example is Tyreek Hill. So it's pretty much the same as agile, but because it's it's made for shorter players. These players have the little quicker stride in their run. So you notice this if you play the beta. A guy like Tyreek Hill does run different than a guy like Christian McCaffrey or a guy like Julio Jones. And Julio Jones is an example of the agile tall archetype, which they have a longer, taller stride. So they still have, you know, the good jukes and the good moves in the open field because they're agile, but these are for guys that are 6'2" and taller. So it's basically that the way they run, their strides are a little bit longer because of their height. Then you have Bruiser. This is a slower rate of turning. It takes longer to change direction, slower evasive special moves than agile players, but more powerful power moves. This applies to skill positions and linemen with less than 80 agility and are guys who are over 225 pounds. The example they used was CJ Anderson for this. So the Bruiser guys, they're not going to juke or spin as fast as the agile guys, and they shouldn't, but they're going to also be way more powerful to run you over and truck you because that's the style of player they are. Then you have Bruiser Quick, which is, in my opinion, the best type of Bruiser. It's similar to the regular Bruiser, but with custom animations for bigger players who do have quick feet. This applies to the Bruiser skill positions and linemen with speed ratings of 90 plus. An example of this is Derrick Henry. Yes, Derrick Henry's big, he's a bruiser, he will run you over, he will stiff arm you into the ground, but he has pretty quick feet for a tall guy, so he can still get off some of those moves in the open field. Even though that's not maybe his go-to, he still does have quick feet. He's not exactly like a CJ Anderson who's just kind of slow all around. Then you have Bruiser Heavy, which this gives you custom animations for bigger players who don't typically carry the ball, such as offensive and defensive linemen. This applies to any bruiser who is 290 pounds or heavier. So basically your defensive linemen, your offensive linemen are going to obviously run a lot different than a running back or a wide receiver, and that's what this archetype is there for. But you do have your fast linemen, the linemen that do have 90 speed and aren't super heavy. Those guys will run a little bit quicker and have the Bruiser Quick archetype. So I know that might sound confusing, but it's been up on the screen here if you want to read it over again. That's basically how those archetypes work. Now they talk about the changes that were made from the beta. So one of the biggest polarizing things was the user on defense. People said it felt too slow and too sluggish. And they said while the feedback around this was consistent, it was also very polarizing. The speed at which defenders change of direction will be largely unchanged because the vision for gameplay balance is focused more on authentic player movements and strategic decisions. While we're investigating to ensure there are no bugs in player movement that could have been, unintended, the intent of this system is to reduce the area of the field a single defensive player can cover based on ratings and direction changes, and encourage coverage defenders to make choices about what routes they want to take away. As player ratings increase, the amount of ground players can cover will also increase. I think this is good. I never liked for these past few years how user defenders were able to cover so much ground quickly and change direction. On the other end, being a good user, there is a level of skill with it. So now that that's gone, you're probably going to see the pass game open up a lot more, but I like the whole idea of you have to kind of pick which route you want to take away and go with it. You can't just try to run in a circle between the numbers and try to just almost negate the whole middle of the field by being able to, just jump around a lot. I kind of like that, but also when they say they want things to be authentic and more realistic, there are other things they do in the game do kind of go against that, like some of the abilities and things like that. So kind of seems like they're trying to play both sides of the coin on some of that. They did change the hurdle in the truck. I talked about this in a previous video, so I won't really talk about this too long. The hurdle is back on the Y button. The truck is now back on the joystick, which I think most people wanted. Then they talk about zone coverage. So when the beta started, they said zone coverage systems weren't completely tuned yet, so much of the feedback was expected about zone coverage being bad. Here's what they did to improve it. It said they improved reaction times relative to breaking on the ball, which scales per defender's zone rating or man coverage rating in match zones, because in match, you do at a certain point match up and play man. They added logic to modify break on ball reactions based on facing the direction of the defender, meaning if the defender can clearly see the throw, he will break faster than when he cannot see the throw. Now, they say this like every year in Madden, and I never find it to be true. I find that people with their back to the ball still break on the ball kind of the same way that a guy looking at the ball does, so I'm curious to see if this is actually going to work this year. They also improved zone behavior for defenders with zone coverage ability, so the guys that have those zone coverage abilities probably going to jump the passes, jump routes a little bit better. And then they just fixed some other logic problems with cover 3s and stuff like that. They also said cover 3 and cover 2 coverages will get more updates later after the launch, be it title updates, because there's still some bugs and they're not probably performing exactly how they intended. So while the usering is going to pretty much stay the same, which means you're not going to be able to jump all over the field, and you're going to kind of have to take away one route. It does sound like they improved the break on the ball a little bit and made players, especially guys with good zone ratings, be very much more aware, and they're going to play a little bit tighter coverage and react a little better. So if that is true, if the zone was buffed a little bit but the user stays the same, then I don't think the defense is going to be as bad as it was in the beta. The reason it was so bad in the beta is because there was literally no user, the zone was awful, all zones were awful, and there was really no pass rush, the blitzing didn't work very well, so there was just nothing. But they also talked about the AI pass rush and said that it didn't seem as effective as the user pass rushing felt. And I thought this too. I felt that the pass rush in the beta, compared to Madden 20, the defensive lineman with abilities didn't seem to really block shed that much. So it said they slightly boosted the win probabilities of AI-controlled pass rushers on Simulation All-Pro, Competitive All-Pro, and Competitive All-Madden, which will make high-rated pass rushers have a bit more impact when AI-controlled. For context around this tuning, the stats from the beta showed an average of less than 1 defensive sack per game, while we are targeting closer than 2 per game. So this is what they essentially did to defense. They buffed the zones and the break on ball a little bit. They kept users the same, and it looks like they buffed the pass rush a little bit more. So with all that considered, I think defense will be a little bit better. It does sound like off the top it's going to be a year of maybe play coverage and have, those defensive line abilities unless somebody finds a good blitz or something like that. But at least they tuned some of the stuff on defense so that it's just not a complete trash can. So curious to see how this is going to play out. Now let's talk about the film study ability, one of the most controversial things along with the user defenders. This was an ability that after you ran so many plays, you could see the play art of the offense. Even if they were changing the routes and doing hot routes, you would see every change of the route for that play that you came out in. And a lot of people wanted it to stay, a lot of people wanted it gone. So it said, outside of the feedback around the defensive user, the ability that led to the most polarizing topic among our community, and it's exactly the feedback we were looking for. We included this ability in the beta to get a gauge from our players about how this could function in game. While the film study ability will not be available in game for launch, we do plan to introduce it later in the year via a title update. We're going to continue to iterate, balance, and tune the ability to make it as fair and as balanced as possible for all players before we release it. So they are bringing film study back. So the people that wanted it, you're going to pretty much get what you want. The people that didn't want it, well, it's coming back. Just like I said before, I don't think this is going to help bad players beat good players, because, if you all these years you already knew what play was coming, you still couldn't stop it. Seeing the routes on the field isn't really going to make a difference. You still have to know how to stop it. This will affect when two players are equally matched up, like equal skill. Then that's when it's going to affect things. But they did say it's not going to come back in the same version, so it might come back as an X factor instead of an every down ability. It might be that you have to run a play 5 times instead of 3 times. We don't know how they're going to bring it back, but they said it would be different, so that's just something to look out for. They also talked about fatigue penalties for scrambling QBs. People said that the fatigue was too crazy, and it kind of was. It said here that the feedback around scrambling QBs told us that countering scrambling QBs felt difficult on defense, but also that the fatigue penalties to the out-of-position ball carriers felt too punitive at times. So this is what they did. They decreased the fatigue penalty for simply running with an out-of-position ball carrier but not getting hit. They increased the fatigue penalty when taking hits with an out-of-position ball carrier, more significant when taking hit stick tackles. So if you're taking off of Lamar Jackson or you're using Tyreek Hill in a Wildcat, as long as you're not taking hits, you're going to probably fatigue the normal way you would fatigue in the game, right? But if you're constantly getting hit, taking tackles, and especially if you're taking hit sticks, you're going to fatigue a lot quicker. So there's still going to be kind of a need to slide or go out of bounds and not take unnecessary hits, because once that fatigue builds up, then you are going to be fumbling the ball. So that was most of the important stuff. I will link the entire blog below, but that was all of the really most important gameplay changes. Like always, until we play the game, this is just words on a website until we play the game, because sometimes they say it's going to work one way and it's not. Friday, they're releasing more information, something around the tuning of abilities, about trying to balance them, so that's going to be interesting. If you're interested in that, remember, subscribe, bell on, that's coming Friday. As always, I will see you guys next time.